mention anything about them. But let me just go ahead and read that 5 through 9 that we talked about last week. And it read, "For this reason I left you in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city as I have commanded you. If a man is blameless, the husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. For a bishop must be blameless, as steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convict those who contradict." And that last verse, remember, man has put in the divisions in here as far as verses, and even in mine has even has a heading in here. But the thought is going to continue from verse 9 and talk about why it is so important for elders to be able to defend the truth, because of what Paul is going to be saying, what's going on there, and what's really going on in the world today. You know, when I read through this chapter and what we talked about last week, there's one word that really rings loud and clear. We could say, why does the local church need elders? And you could say, well, because that's the way the Lord wants it. That's true. But folks, can you think of one main word why local congregations need elders? Can you think of a word that just jumps out at you? That's it. Thank you very much. Why do you think churches need leadership? Why is leadership so important? Think in the government area, think in the area of the family. Why is leadership so important? Just think about it, guys. Go ahead.
So that the congregation can stay focused on the goal.
I like it. Direction. All right. Tony?
Follow the rules of the law.
Okay. And enforcing the rules. Because I want you guys to be thinking what happens with lack of leadership. You know, I told you guys last week when we were talking about this, does somebody just wake up one day and all of a sudden, hey, man, I'm qualified today? Is that the way it works? No, they have been working through this. And so these qualities should be present anyways. If we don't have eldership. We did, we don't, and we hope to someday again. Does that mean there is zero leadership here?
Shouldn't be.
Shouldn't be, right? There shouldn't be. Leadership is so important. We notice it within the family, right? We understand that. Even in Titus, we're going to get into that about the older women teaching the younger ones. That's called leadership, folks. And so when you talk about not being a novice and handling the Word of God, obviously those leadership qualities should be showing even now. So when somebody, when we get to the point where we're appointing elders, it's about, well, he's already demonstrated, Tim.
Well, I think, and going back to the 1 Timothy text in 1 Timothy 3:1, the New American Standard says that any man aspires to the office. So what you just talked about is that you don't aspire to something, just wake up one day and aspire to do that.
Yeah.
It's been practicing and planning and doing the things in your life that would get you to that point. So once you're there, because there could be all kinds of men who would meet these, but if they don't aspire to be that in that position, then they're not qualified.
That's right. That's right. And some versions, they just use the same word, or a different word, same thing. See, if you don't desire it, you're not qualified. Now, if you desire, then you're working towards it. And I'm just trying to plant the seed right now that if we don't aspire, if we don't desire, will we ever have elders here? It won't happen. If you don't have the desire and you don't have the aspiration, you're not going to be working towards these qualifications that we talked about right here. That he's blameless, the husband of one wife, with the faithful children, and not accused of anything. He talks about this bishop must be blameless, a steward of God, and not self-willed, not quick-tempered. These are things you can work on, obviously. A person might say, I've struggled with this, or I'm going to work at this and develop and get stronger and make a positive impression, especially with the sheep that I'm the shepherd. Now I'm going to have an influence on them. If I'm going to lead, I really would encourage them to follow, and they're not going to follow somebody who's not being a leader. And I'll just make one more point before we move on. Guys, how many are familiar with the book of Judges? The book of Judges. Have you ever read through Judges? Can somebody just tell me what happened during the period of Judges? You guys remember whenever there was a judge, what was going on? No, when there was a judge that was alive and leading the people, things were good, right? What happened as soon as the judge died? They fell away. Then what happened when the judge was appointed? Came back. When he died, fell away. Judge appointed, came back. That vicious cycle just kept coming. Which it always impressed me about the idea how important leadership is. And we need to ask ourselves, are we showing that? Are we demonstrating that in so many different ways? Because you have people looking up to you. If you're an older couple, you have younger couples looking up to you. If you're a young mom and you got these older moms, you got that example that is there. You've got these new Christians, you got the older Christians. You got these young men, you got the older men. And to sit back and think that, well, I don't care how people view me, we're in serious trouble there. And so I just want to make that point, but I really want to stress as we go into this next section, remember verse 9. Okay? And then we'll go verse by verse, and I'll just read, you guys will read to the end of the chapter. But remember verse 9. Holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convict those who contradict. Keeping the church sound, strong, pure. Okay? The evil influences that can come in. And it can happen, folks. We know it can happen. With new converts, they'll sometimes bring baggage with them. And what do we mean by that? Yeah, in other words, when they're brought out of, let's say, worldliness or denominationalism or any other ism that's out there that we discussed a couple weeks ago. They've got baggage and they're learning. And so there's some things that they have to clear up, and yet they might have some wrong ideas, and we just need to help them and say, well, no, that's not right, and just help them along. And if we keep our head in the sand, if we're not concerned about the dangers that are out there, and that's one of the things that I see Paul telling Titus, you need to appoint elders in every city. The local church needs this. And we, since we don't have them, doesn't mean we can't be on guard about it, so that's what I'm trying to stress right now. We need to be aware of the dangers, keeping this church pure. Now let's notice as we read through the rest of this, let's start in verse 10. Let's start up here. Let's start with Debbie. We'll go back to Brian. We'll zigzag, but we don't have much to read. We usually just read 2 verses apiece, and so we won't get past the 2 rows. But start in verse 10.
For there are many insubordinate, both idle, talkers, deceivers, especially those of circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert the whole household, teaching things which they ought not, for the sake of dishonest gain.
One of them, a prophet of their own, said, Christians are always liars, and the beasts, lazy gluttons. This testimony is true, therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in faith.
Not paying attention to Jewish myths and commandments of men who turn away from the truth. To be, to the poor, pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. But both their mind and their conscience are defiled.
They profess that they know God, but by their works they deny Him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate.
Wow. Now you can see what's going on here. You can see the danger that the early church was facing. By the way, is this outdated? We don't need this today? I mean, you can see that this problem is prevalent in our time period. And we need to be aware of it. That's why I love these studies, because the scriptures are timeless. They're just as applicable today as they were 2,000 years ago when the first century church was facing these things. And if we neglect to learn from the past, what happens? You're doomed to repeat. We know that. I didn't come up with that, by the way. So, look at verse 10. He said, For there are many insubordinate, both idle talkers, deceivers, especially those of the circumcision. Who's the circumcision? The Jews. Okay. Why especially those? I mean, let's face it. Did they care for the Christians? Did they care for Christianity? No, I mean, they're like, no. We're under the old law. We're God's special people. We don't want to hear a gospel that's for everybody. We're an elite class of our own. And so they're not, they didn't like the gospel being preached, which is one of the reasons why Jesus was crucified. And he's telling them here that because of that, telling Titus, I'm going to keep saying Timothy. If you ever hear me say Timothy this morning, I meant Titus, okay? That they had to hold fast the word and be prepared. Can you guys, you think about the scriptures telling us we are to give an answer for the hope that's within us. How are you going to accomplish that, guys? How are you going to do that? Come on, there's one word is jumping at. What is it? What? Thank you. All right. Study. When? I mean, does the Bible tell you what time of day to study the scriptures? No, I mean, you have to think. You've heard me preach that sermon. God's people are great thinkers. There are things that are told us without the specifics. Parents, bring your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Well, it doesn't tell me about reading the Bible stories. It doesn't tell me about teaching them to pray. It doesn't tell me to do this. Think, as parents, you have the ability to do that. And there's so many areas that are generally spoken of that we can come up with some specifics without. We're not going against the scriptures. I mean, we're told to sing. We got our song leaders picking out specific songs. Okay, they can do that under the general category of singing. So to study, when are we going to study? I don't know when. So since you don't know when, you can't study, right? No, you have to study. And why do you have to study? What's that? We're commanded. And why do we study, guys?
To show ourselves approved.
To show ourselves approved. Can keep on in the verse. Rightly dividing to give an answer. Dave?
Discerning the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah, if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to rebuke them sharply as he talks about here. Because you and I both know the problem that we run into in, being politically incorrect today is that when you rebuke or when you stand up for what is right, what are you accused of? Judging, know-it-all, arrogant, legalist. See, this is what keeps people's mouths shut. Because I don't want to be accused of that. And, it's like when you take a stand for something, is that narrow? When you take a stand for something, are you being narrow?
Yes.
Say yes. This is all part of it. It's this idea of standing up is like we get into a Bible class and we're kind of bashful. Just exert yourself. It's not arrogance. You just say, yeah, that's what it means. It means that we can know what is right. Didn't Jesus say that? You can know the truth. I don't really know what truth is. Well, that's your concept. No. We can have a common understanding of what the Word of God has to say. Unfortunately, what we face in the religious realm is that's your interpretation. And remember last week's sermon? Can you make the Bible say anything that you want? You guys remember the sermon last time? Can you make it say anything you want? Yeah. Did you guys remember any of the points last week where you can make the Bible say anything that it wants? Do you remember any of them? Yeah. Those that stole, steal. Wow, the Bible teaches that? Yeah, it's right in the Bible there. Ephesians chapter 4. Well, you need to read the rest of the verse. He that stole, steal. No more. But you can stop and cut off a verse. You can make the Bible say anything that it wants. And so you and I have to study, handle it properly, and be prepared to take our, punishment, or, there's a word. But you're going to take your lumps. That's really what I was going to say. Meant to say. You're going to take your lumps for standing up for what is right. And not everybody's going to like you for that. But if we're going to keep the church pure, if we're going to stay on the straight and narrow, as he talks about here, you have to be able to spot the insubordinate. When somebody says, there are many insubordinate. Oh, yeah. What's that? If you can't spot the insubordinate, if you can't spot the idle talkers, the deceivers, who's an idle talker? What's an idle talker?
Somebody just talks about anything that's not very specific about that. They're just rambling.
Okay, use that in a scriptural sense, the Bible. Anything else comes to mind with an idle talker? Somebody mentioned it. A gossiper. You know, you're only saying things to be destructive, right? You're not being constructive. And it's wasted words. And these words of ours, we're going to be judged by, and so we need to be careful, Tim.
Well, and the text says 10, where there are many, not just a few, so they're really hard to spot. Now, there's a lot of people, and it's not so difficult to spot. It's more difficult to find somebody speaking the truth than it is all these other things.
Isn't that the truth? And go ahead.
Empty talkers.
Yes.
Or they can talk all day and not say anything or something.
Have you ever talked with anybody like that? Yeah, were you saying anything? No, but that's true. I mean, I've sat in Bible studies, and I just, you know, the guys that come knocking at your door, and I invite them in and talk. And they'll go on for 15, 20 minutes, and they get mad at me because when they're done, I'll say, what's your point? There's no point to what you're talking about. You have been just trained to just spout these verses off, Old Testament and the New Testament, and you think there's a connection between those two. There's not, but you've been told, say this, say this, say this. It's just there. You're not accomplishing anything. Which tells us how important it is for us, if we're going to have an impact on others, know what you're talking about. And you can't know what you're talking about unless you study. Study. And ask questions. Get to the bottom of things. And as Tim talks about, there are many out there, and sadly, if you do this, what happens to you? You get labeled. Right? You'll start to stand out like a sore thumb. If you want to fit in, don't say anything. Right? If you want to reach nobody with the gospel, if you want to say, I'm going to be a Christian for 40 years, but I am not reaching anybody with the gospel, none of them that I know of are ever going to become Christians. And how do you accomplish that? Keep your mouth shut. That's what you do. You don't say anything. Here he is. The idol talkers, the deceivers. We know what that's all about. Especially those of the circumcision. You need to be on guard against them. Now look what he says here in verse 11. He says, whose mouths must be stopped. Who subvert whole households, teaching things which they ought not for the sake of dishonest gain. Now wait a second. Whose mouths must be stopped? Are we going to be able to stop the mouths of all those kind of people in the world today? So what's he saying? Whose mouths must be stopped. We can't control what goes on out there. Can we control what goes on in here? Absolutely. And the people that you're exposed to, you're in control of that. You're in control of that. You say, I don't have to listen to that. And here, you know, it would just be mind-boggling that if a brother or sister, you know, we got members here who are starting to say things, you know, you're sitting over in there visiting, maybe you're in a Bible study, and a brother or sister whispers something to you that you know is like way out there in left field, and you just like, and you walk away going, man, that guy, I mean, they're way off. And you don't deal with it. The danger, if you don't deal with it, the danger is that it'll permeate. We brethren, remember, as a local congregation, I'm saying, we have to put forth the effort here to make sure that we keep the church pure. And you say, well, Chuck, I'm not a preacher. I'm not even an elder. And you might say, I'm not even an older Christian. I've only been in the faith for a few years. Can you still know what error is? Yes. And can you speak up? That's what we're trying to establish here. Tim.
Well, that's what initially started talking about the elders and the leadership. Even without elders, you need leadership. So leadership doesn't mean it's the oldest working your way down to the youngest. It just means when you have the opportunity, and sometimes you make the opportunity to step up and do something, when you know as a leader that's what you need to do in the congregation. Well,
Tim, if you're showing leadership qualities, you got a new convert here that is all of a sudden somebody said something to him that's concerned him, should he feel comfortable just to come talk to you? Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. You know, when somebody's got a concern, and is that gossip? No, that's not gossip. When you see a problem and you want it dealt with and you want to help, but you're young in the faith, you say, I need some guidance, and you want to make sure it's provided. But again, we're putting that responsibility on all our shoulders here. You know, if you get elders in a local congregation that are appointed and they're not doing their job, and you're following along blindly and engaged in error, are you excused? No, we're not excused. Well, the elders didn't do anything here about that sinfulness. I guess, what am I supposed to do about it? Well, you might want to go and talk to them about it, and get this problem rectified. And which I've heard recently, well, not recently, but I remember in another congregation, another state, where members did go, and the elders basically said, well, if you don't like what we're doing here, just go somewhere else. Okay. I mean, you're not going to stand for what is right. There might come times when we have to stand against. And of course, we know from Acts chapter 20 the problems that church at Ephesus was going to face. The problem was going to rise even amongst the own eldership. So we let's not think that elders are immune to error. Okay? It's just a caution for all of us, though, to make sure that we stay on guard and alert and understand our responsibilities. No, whose mouths can't be stopped? Well, their mouths must be stopped, he says. And, if they're subverting whole household and teaching things which they shouldn't, they got ulterior motives. They have this dishonest gain. That's in contrast to the elders, right? The elders, when they're to be appointed, they're not greedy for money. Who becomes an elder and is greedy for money? How would that help them? So I want to become an elder because I'm greedy for money. Well, how's that going to help you? Anybody know? Yeah, but I mean, just think about it. It's like I want to, a person says, I want to be an elder. Can an eldership put you in a situation where you can have access to financial gain? Is my point. Yeah, and that's my point. I mean, how the finances are used, they can use them to their own benefit, obviously. And the danger is lining their own pockets, and because of their influence. Remember this, folks. Remember this. Because of their influence, they can go in and influence households and widows. The Bible talks about that. People going in there and taking advantage of them.
Or I have a business, or my family has a business. We're doing a lot of construction or whatever, and we're sending it to my family. Oh man, isn't that the truth? I've got this construction business. This church is going to have to expand soon. Man, if I become an elder, we can get that job, right? And use basically church membership as networking for your business, right? Now, are we saying it's wrong to call on brother so-and-so or get brother so-and-so to work? Of course not. We're not saying that. We're talking about the ulterior motives here. We're talking about the person who has he's not honest, okay? He's talking about the dishonest gain that is there. And now, here's an interesting thing that I want you to think about, verse 12. Because Paul even says, one of them, a prophet of their own. So this Cretan, this one from Crete, who they hold up and say, yeah, he's one of our prophets. He's even said about you guys, all Cretans are liars. Doesn't that pose a little bit of a dilemma for you? Here's my question. Is he telling the truth? Okay, so if he's a Cretan, I just want you to know all Cretans are liars. Okay, so you're a Cretan, so you're lying. So now they're not liars. That's just kind of a play on it, but Paul used it in the sense where even he acknowledges that they're a bunch of liars. Okay? Their own people,
You know, one of your own is saying this about them. And so what Paul is telling Titus is, this is what we're up against. These kind of people that are, as he mentions here, they're always liars, they're evil beasts, they're lazy gluttons. They want stuff for nothing. You going to let your guard down around people like that? You know, if anything, he's saying, you know, you need to stay alert. So there's nobody like this in our society today, right? Folks, that mindset can come in here. You've heard me preach on it. You've heard me preach on the attitude of entitlement, have you not? What is the attitude of entitlement? What is that? Expand.
It's a pretty more what you've done. You have the opinion that you deserve more than what you actually should.
Right. I just deserve it because of who I am. You know, I don't have to earn it. You know, a child can have it towards his parent. Well, I'm your child. Just give me that new car. I'm your child. You got to bail me out. You know, this attitude of entitlement. You know, it can happen with somebody famous. You get pulled over for speeding. You know who I am. You know, that attitude of entitlement. Now, can it creep into the church? How so, Tim?
Well, I'm due this because of who I am. My family started this congregation, right? Or I'm an elder, or I'm a deacon, or I'm a teacher, or I'm, the president of some club in the neighborhood. Right. For any reason, anything that I think I'm due because of who I am, my status, or whatever I think I am.
Or I'm just a member. I'm just a member. Chuck, I want us to have a quick business meeting before. Well, I want my rent paid this month. Well, what happened? Well, I spent all the money. Well, why didn't you budget? Well, I know your business. I'm a member of this church, and now I want them to pay my bills. See, the attitude of entitlement, guys, is on every level. Okay? And the warning signs need to be there. And, this is the cool thing is when the church stays strong, okay, and all the list of the things that we've been talking about all morning, when those things are confronted, what happens to those kind of people that are attending? They're gone. They're gone. That's what keeps the church pure. Or, what's the other positive, hopeful? They change. Okay. They repent. Okay. But really, this is what happens when you have people that like this, and you go, no, we're not paying your hydro or your electric bill or your rent because you went out and wasted all your money. You went to the casino, whatever. You're wanting us to pay for your. You remember we talked about the prodigal son. The worst thing anybody could ever have done when he was hungry and in that field is to give him something to eat. You might say, well, I just felt sorry for him. It's the worst thing you could have done. Worst thing you could have done. And for churches today, the worst thing that they do to help people is to give people stuff when they don't work. Because if a person doesn't work, what? They don't deserve to eat. Now, does that mean we don't help? We don't have compassion? Of course we do. Circumstances, you have to evaluate them. I don't want to come across like I'm being heartless. I'm trying to keep in the context here of folks of what we're up against and keeping the church pure and why there's a need for leadership. Okay? And why we need to study and why we do the things that we do. Why do we help brother so-and-so, but we don't help sister so-and-so over here? Well, because of the circumstances that we're describing here. And we need to understand that and not get upset when you understand those principles. Oh, you're right. Yeah, that wasn't the church's duty. I was out of line for expecting that. That's what you would want. Like the prodigal son saying, my dad was a good man. He's got servants that have bread enough to spare. He's starting to remember that he was good and he was just. And for the local church, they're always liars, there's evil beasts, there's the lazy gluttons. In verse 13, this testimony is true. Therefore, rebuke them what? Rebuke them sharply that they may be sound in the faith. So now I know it's not just to run them off. We're not trying to preach the truth that's so narrow that we come across like we just don't want you here. We like our little our little group here and you're an outsider, get out of here. No, we're rebuking people sharply so they'll be sound in the faith. And so the point is, we want people to be saved. We want people to go to heaven. There should be, our speech should be seasoned with salt. You know, there needs to be love. Go ahead.
One thing that we see today, in contrast to how it is when you're here, most people, even if they were out of work and hungry, they didn't go to a church or a congregation looking for a handout because they understood that people should be working within the church for the betterment of man. Nowadays, the church is looked more upon, churches in general,
Right.
as a social
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
And so we call them bums or whatever they call them. We're describing the lifestyle.
Yep.
They go to the churches looking for a handout, which they have no right to.
We get calls all the time. They got a whole list. Can I get my note? Click. Get my click. You know, I'm going on to the next one. I'm going on to the next one. If you were to poll people on the street, the average person on the street, what should be the work of churches? Now, we know what the work of the church is, right? We know evangelism, edification, and helping needy saints. But if you had asked the average person on the street, what are churches in the community to do? What is their work? And their answer would be,
Help with the social needs of the community.
provide the social needs of the community. Right? Social. Whether it's the chicken dinners, you know, and the entertainment that is there. And just providing. It's that whole concept that you can. Now, you don't get that from the New Testament. You get that from people who have drifted off. And you would get that from churches in the first century if they didn't stand against those. You remember, Paul's telling Titus, you know, we need elders. We need them to, you know, to confront these people. Their mouths need to be stopped. They don't need to go into houses and line their pockets. Why? Because this is what's been going on. And it will go on. You're not going to stop it until you have people open up their eyes and say, this isn't right. This, you know, we do it on the TV and the radio. Trying to get people to think for themselves is the hardest job in the world. Seriously, on a spiritual level. Getting people to think for themselves is really hard. And why is that? Why is it so hard to get people to think for themselves? They don't want to? How else? Why else?
They don't need to. Somebody else will do it for them.
Somebody else will do it for them. Why else? Give me another one. I don't have the ability. Tim?
Too complicated. Right?
Too
I
complicated.
can't think that. I need somebody smarter to tell me what I should think.
That's right. And that's what we pay you for. You know, to think for me, Josh.
I think the biggest one, they've been conditioned that way.
They've been conditioned. Oh, you're spot on about that. You talk about training people, conditioning people not to think for themselves. You know, that's happened when I was in China telling them, you know, you were conditioned to not think for yourself. And we gave examples in that, and they understood that principle. It can happen in religious groups. Yeah?
Well, and you can't know that because it is too complicated. But I've been to school and I've studied these things, so let me tell you how it should be. And they keep the people, and you don't need to study. Just let me do it, and so you keep the people almost like the Dark Ages and all.
Right.
Suppress the people and just lord over them.
And of course, that mindset never creeps into the Lord's church, does it? Because everybody loves to do personal work. Everybody likes to have their own Bible study set up and teach people the lost, right? Everybody does that. That's sarcasm. Okay. Now?
It's easier to not think.
It is. Oh, it's, the path of least resistance. Right? We just understand that. You pour some water here, it's going to go where there's not an obstacle. And to not think, I'm telling you, it's the easiest thing to do. It's hard. I mean, you have to concentrate. We're not only talking, earlier I was talking about making the time, right? Well, it's more than just making the time because you actually have to think about it, digest it, apply it. That's really what profitable study is all about. We're not studying this like an encyclopedia today. You and I are studying to how, as Brian mentioned in his prayer, make ourselves a better person.
Well, like when you think on something, if you take the time to think, then you're obligated to do something with that. Then you never think. You're not, you don't feel obligated to do anything. And that's where that whole ignorance is bliss thing, because
Yes.
you're not convicted one way or another. But if you start to think, you either have to change or you live with your guilt or whatever.
Yeah.
But the moment you start thinking is the moment you then hold yourself accountable for what you're going to do with what.
Let's face it. Out of sight, out of mind. It's hard to feel guilty. But if you open up this Bible, let's face it, folks. If I had the time, and I'm not a speed reader, but in 15 minutes, if I just read you the whole Bible, if I just read you, let's just say, the whole New Testament, I will have described all of this. Somewhere on some of those pages, I just described your spiritual state to a T. This is a mirror. This is the mirror to our soul. We know how am I really in the eyes of God? Read. You'll see how He sees you. So if you don't look at this, then ignorance is bliss, as Mal talked about. That I'm okay. I'm okay. And that's why I'll go visit people who are drifting away from the Lord. And I just wrote that to a friend this week saying, that's what often happens when I go visit people. The first things out of their mouth is, I'm okay. Yeah. They're okay because they're not looking. That's like somebody's got their hair messed up. Man, your hair's a mess. No, it's good. Oh, I see you haven't looked in a mirror. And so if you don't look in this, you look great. I look great today. And that's sad because people are not looking into the perfect law of liberty and seeing themselves as they really are. So yes, we're going to have to rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. That's our ultimate goal here. We're not going to apologize. People want us to feel bad for, they'll say, you're being legalistic and you're making it narrow and you're the only ones and that's the way it has to be. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but this is the perfect law of liberty. And I won't apologize for that. People want you to feel bad about that. It's like, you got to be politically correct because they want you to feel uncomfortable for standing up for something that's right. And that is sad, what's happening in the world today. Not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men who turn from the truth. I'm going to tell you something. You're not going to know what a Jewish fable is. You're not going to know what the commandments of men are if you don't study. It's those subtle teachings that are so dangerous out there. Tim?
You mean that Jewish myth might be true? Well, if I don't know what truth is, I'll think the myth is true.
And that's why people will tell you it's right. It is the truth. Well, because you haven't looked at the true standard. It's like, how long is this line? I think it's 27 inches. Okay, but let's get a measure, and then we'll know for sure. Dan?
We talk about the Jewish myths and fables, and that's what the verse says. It's also pretty different from the way people talk and think. But really what Paul is getting at here is that these are things that sound godly, but aren't.
That's it.
When we phrase it that way, people I think identify with it a lot more readily.
Yeah, you're exactly right. What? He's calling it what it is. What are they painting it as? Scripture. Let's understand that. That's what everybody does. False teaching today. They say, "Whoa, man, I would spot false teaching any day." Well, we're calling it false teaching. They're calling it the Word of God. They're talking a message from the Lord. Oh, well, I can let my guard down. and that's sad. And that's why so many people today are deceived, which makes our job even harder. And if we let our guard down, folks, and I think that's what Paul is getting across in this first chapter. I see Paul telling Titus, we got some serious problems. And if we don't have leadership, and if we don't keep our eyes open and our ears open to hear, then you're going to be susceptible to these very things I'm telling you about that you should be turning away from. I told you guys that before when I went away from home for the first time. Here I am, 17 years old, never been away from home for over 2 days, but I go away for 4 months, come back home, and like I told you last Wednesday, man, I'd never heard. I didn't realize my family was such a cussing family. Because on out, everything stood out. And I can tell you, the more you study, what's going to happen? The more you study, every little thing that's wrong will jump out at you. And people are going to say, man, you are nitpicking. Now, the less you study, the more comfortable you are with everything. That's just the cause and effect. So study, everything will jump out at you. Don't study, you'll feel more comfortable around a lot of things and listening to a lot of stuff that we shouldn't be listening to. This is common sense stuff. And now look what he says in verse 15. To the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. But even their mind and conscience are defiled. It's the sad part, is that the people today, it's interesting. I'll give you people who claim to have the truth try to tell me that you can't know the truth. So it's like that Cretan liar. We're all liars. Well, then are you lying? And when somebody says you can't know the truth, well, how do I even know what you're saying is right then? If we can't know what truth is, do I have to believe you that you can't know what truth is?
So then everything is untrue, right?
Yeah.
There's no absolute, right? It's just every man does what is right in his own eyes.
But see, but my point is that a truth? Is that an absolute truth that there's no such thing as absolute truth? And so how do you absolutely know that? See, it starts to fry the brain. But see, they're trying to get you to think in such an illogical way. When somebody comes up, that's like the person who says, Chuck, you can't point the finger at air. What are you doing to me? I wasn't born yesterday. You can't say that to me because you're pointing the finger at me. And they think, well, no, I can point the finger at you. You just can't point the finger at me. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Right, you're right. They want you to stop thinking. Okay, Dave?
Well, there's a difference between doctrine and opinion, isn't there?
Sure, and that's our point. But see, the point we're trying to drive home is they're saying their opinions are doctrine. And we stand on the Word of God. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us strong. And we're going to stand fast and to the end. And that's what's going to get us to heaven. Thank you, folks. Appreciate your comments. Time's done.
Should be 6 9.